So, good evening and welcome to another special edition of Seek Speaks. I'm John Flanders. Oh, Senator, you made it. uh, this evening we have a special guest, Senator Sujata Gadkar Wilcox,
Yeah.
who is
Hey, Kat.
Senate Chair of the Special Select Committee on Special Education here in the legislature. And we are very happy that you're able to join us. The senator is a new senator, and she represents a district including parts of Bridgeport, Monroe, and Trumbull. Uh, Let me start with a little bit of disclaimer before we get going. SEEK is an organization of parents, advocates, and attorneys committed to expanding uh, systematic change to benefit children with special needs here in Connecticut. We are we've been in business for about 6 years, and we are very happy to have developed good relationships with many of the members of our legislature, including the senator who you're speaking to tonight. A little bit of disclaimer: there are lawyers who are going to be on your screen, including including myself. We are not your lawyers, so nothing that you hear from us should be considered legal advice. Further, I would be remiss if I did not point out that SEEK is a nonprofit organization, and we do expend costs in doing the work for you. So we strongly encourage you to go to our website and make a donation to help make this go forward. So, without further ado, uh, welcome, Senator, and we hope we haven't dragged you out of a session to talk to us. And if you,
No, well, if I keep looking up or if I'm a little distracted, it's because I'm just waiting to see what the next bill is and when we have to vote. So I might have to jump off or my bill is not up yet. So I think I'm okay for a little bit until I have to jump off for a vote.
okay, well, then let's just jump right in. The Select Committee was established for this session to address what was called a crisis in special education. What would you describe as the crisis now that you've been working on it for the better part of the session?
Yes. Well, if I can take a minute and just say hi to everyone who's listening, and as the newest senator, I'm learning a lot about this process. Just so people know my background, I'm a educator myself and a faculty member at Quinnipiac University. I teach constitutional law and human rights law. So education is a big priority for me. So I'm chair of the Special Education Committee, a member of education, and vice chair of higher education. My background is public interest law, so another lawyer here along with the group. But now I'm teaching. So a former, and somebody said recovery litigator. I don't know which way to put it, but and so my background in law and public interest law, that's always been my career. So after law school, I was a litigator, and then I left that to be the director of a nonprofit program, which was called Juvenile Law, which again was to work with young people to help them understand their rights and responsibilities under the law. So that, you can see, is my heart and my passion is with education, and particularly with students. And so I'm chair of other committees as well. We have a new committee on government oversight and another committee on regulations review. Both are about separation of powers for anybody who's interested in sort of these constitutional structural issues, and making sure that executive agencies stay within the parameters of what they've been assigned. And then vice chair of judiciary, and I'm a member of transportation and general law. So I'm processing a lot while I'm doing this. So it's been great to work with on this bill in particular, to work especially with with advocates and parents and teachers and superintendents and members of boards of education as we're putting something together. And I'm hopeful that that process will continue to be collaborative. So to the question about the crisis in special education, I think it's a question of, I should say we should always start with the primary focus, which is making sure that students have their needs met. And that is both a moral obligation and a legal and constitutional obligation that we have to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our students in terms of their educational needs. The crisis in terms of funding, I think, has come because the spending from districts, or what districts are reporting, outpacing the investment in education from the state. And I think also because there has been no kind of comprehensive oversight of special education, maybe for decades. And so their districts have been, I think, asking questions. Parents have been asking questions. Boards of education have been asking questions. And some of those questions should already have been answered. But I think that the kind of information that can answer those questions was not readily available. So part of what this committee is doing an analysis of that information, like what information is readily available. Do we understand how many students are, not only how many students require some kind of service that falls under special education, but what does that look like? What is the intensity of that service? Is one student who's receiving, who's classified in one way, that student may have very different needs than another student. So do we already have a way to assess all of those things? So I think part of what this bill is looking to do, and again, I think we're taking on a decades-long project with this bill. So I think we'll have to think about it in steps, is to think about how do we understand where we are when it comes to the needs of students, where students are being placed, and some oversight on that process. And then also, where are we in terms of costs on that process? And are those costs reasonable? Are they, is there a way that we can decrease? For example, can we build capacity where for districts where we can allow more students to stay in district that otherwise, who also, by the way, can have their needs met, that otherwise are being put on a bus, and there's they're not in their community, and the district is paying for those transportation costs. So where is the middle ground there, that we make sure we have the providers that can provide the needs for all students that can be met in district, but then we can balance that out by making sure districts are able to serve the students they're able to serve. So I hope that was not too long an answer. This is a very complicated and long bill, as you can see. We've been spending a lot of time in this session working through it, but those are sort of the various components we're trying to look at.
Well, before we follow up on that,
Yeah.
tell us where we are in the process. We see that the Education Committee has it up tomorrow, Appropriations has it up tomorrow. There are, after today, 8 days of session, maybe 6 and 2, 8 days of session left, which isn't a lot of time. What's going on?
Yeah, no, good. That's a great question. So some of this is, and of course, take this from the newest senator who's been there for 3 months. It's just the language is still being negotiated. So the language that came out of committee. So for those who are listening, we do everything in the legislature through committee first, and so we created oh, sorry, that's the office. Hold on one second. Gosh, guess I've been sitting at the computer
You're supposed to be keeping us in the dark, not the
I know. What is going on here? So we created the Committee on Special Education for this very particular focus, so that because the Education Committee focuses on not only special education but other aspects of education, and so with the bill that just passed out of committee, was 63 pages, and it had a lot of components, and there was some I think the committee was not entirely in agreement on all of the provisions, as can be expected for a bill that is 63 pages. And so that's what's happening now, is kind of negotiating of those concepts. Not all of them are going to find their way to the final product. And so it's really kind of trying to figure out what's going to be in that final bill, which we're working on now.
And so we understood that a substitute was being drafted, but that substitute is not yet drafted. Is that what you're saying?
It's not finalized. It's like there are things that are being drafted, but there's nothing finalized. And it's still sort of because it's still a question of, which of those concepts are we going to take forward? So that's still being discussed. So beyond that, you have there's nothing more than what's in the bill is going to be coming. It's just that every single part of that bill is not likely to be in the final version.
Can I ask you about specific sections, or is that too early to talk about them?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you what I know now, but I think it's because we don't have we don't have it finalized, so I don't want to speak before we have the bill finalized. But I'm happy to talk about the sections of the bill as they came out of committee.
Well, okay, so
Yep.
we have three major issues with the bill, right?
Yep.
The first is that there are substantial changes to the due process setting
Yep.
to deal with unilateral parental placements. Um, uh, and that also includes the definition that's in section 1 of unilateral
Yes.
parental placement, which is just inconsistent with federal law.
No, that has been well received and heard, and there are a number of legislators, particularly in the Senate, with that share similar concerns. So I can say that for sure. So we've certainly been looking at that, and I mentioned to a few of you here that that has been something that has certainly come up. So
okay, but we don't know the final
and for me, I think. Yeah, I don't want to say,
okay, I
again, being
understand.
new, I just feel like I don't want to, but I just want you to know that's been well heard. And also there were, I mean, and you saw in the committee meeting, we did particularly this, in fact, it was unanimous in the Senate among the committee members to do a study around due process. So
Right.
I can tell you that's the preference of the Senate. And that's part of what we're.
Okay, so let's do Civics 101.
Yeah.
In order to become a law, both the House and the Senate have to pass exactly the same language. And so the fact that the Senate seems to be opposed to that language, they voted that way, and the House is for that language, suggests that there's probably not agreement on that.
Right.
Correct.
There's not agreement. You saw that in the committee meeting. Yeah.
The second section, obviously, which you've heard a lot about, is this rate setting for private providers, which in the bill as reported by committee, was 6 months of designing a program and then immediate implementation, which
No, we stepped back. Yeah, and even the bill that came out of committee, we stepped back the implementation for sure because yes, that's an important point. And I certainly want parents to be reassured that there really isn't a point to speeding through the process and coming up with a rate system that doesn't actually make sense. And so part of what we're doing is figuring out sort of what components need to be included in order to understand what is even reasonable when it comes to a rate. And that would be the first step before thinking about like what a reasonable rate is. So I would say that those components in terms of steps will all be part of the bill and part of the rate setting process. And it's very much a process.
Let me ask a couple specific questions. In your mind, is it a done deal that we're going to end up with a rate setting process at the end of the day?
No, it's not. I don't think that's I think for sure we need some kind of oversight and we need to understand what is reasonable. Yes. So I will say for sure we need to understand what's reasonable. But that's why I say it's a process because right now we still have to assess what rates are even being charged and whether that is consistent over programs and whether that's just different because of the intensity of the services. We certainly don't want to set a rate as people have mentioned and it was the concern. We absolutely don't want to set rates that are so low that providers that are meeting the needs of students where those needs cannot be met in other districts, like in their district, for example. We need to make sure those needs that they're still available to make those to provide those needs. So it's a very complicated process. And certainly I've learned over the months as I've been doing this that it's even more complicated than I thought going in. Yeah. And so that has to be, but yes, there has to be some because it is also the case that from what we've heard from every district is that the spending is not sustainable. So we need to figure out, okay, well, what's reasonable? But we have to start with that question of what's reasonable and at least figure that out.
Well, but you're making it sound like the purpose of the rate setting is to cut costs.
No. Well, no, it's not it's to find out what reasonable costs are and to make I mean, to the extent you're right, like if everybody's already at reasonable, then that's what it is. to me, the main purpose of this bill is honestly, these are public dollars. We have no oversight over public dollars. That's a big problem. We have to have some way, there has to be some data to show, what is being spent, how it's being spent, and then to determine whether that's reasonable or not. And I think that, that's really the main, to me, that's the main goal. And it sort of aligns nicely with my other committee, which is government oversight, because part of what we're doing in government oversight is making sure that public dollars are spent in a way that's transparent and accountable. And that's all, and how, but again, how those dollars are spent depends on what the needs of the students are, what the needs of the services are. And that's what I'm realizing is very complicated.
So does this mean that the committee is considering adding a study to this for the rate setting?
I would say that's part of that's what I would call is, and not adding a study in terms of like a formal, but that's part of what the first step will be in a rate analysis, I would say, is to look at the data. Now, the State Department does have this, have either some or all of this data. We have to engage with it in a way that is meaningful. So I do think that is the first step, absolutely. And even the State Department, I know, wants, to take a step back and to be able to, engage with that data in a way that like provides some of those answers. So yes.
Well, if you look at the, statutes now, they have broad authority to get the financial details from all approved private special education providers.
Right.
And they haven't done that. And so, I mean, I think
that's exactly, that's part of it. Yeah, that's step one. Yeah.
And from our point of view, the government oversight role is one that really is necessary to try to, push them to do what they need to do on this area.
Yep.
Which is not just, it's a matter of staffing and direction, as well as a matter of them not doing it. I mean,
absolutely. No, that's a good point. No, the oversight, by the way, for me is for every piece of this. It's not just like, we need oversight on one provider or one district. Absolutely. Yeah. It's sort of, where's the data? Can we see the data? Who's engaged with the data? What can we have oversight over that work as well? Absolutely. Yeah. So it's really oversight on the entire process, which I think we haven't had eyes on the process. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, just looking for I'm like, I was like, wait, nothing is.
Yeah, Senator Looney doesn't need you at the moment, right?
Yeah, no, not you. I was looking to see. I'm like, wait, that still hasn't changed. I guess we're, the Senate.
In the third area, we have, terrific concerns about, I mean, there's lots of other sections, and I don't want to, just say it's those three, but the third area is the section that takes out certain provisions of the IEP, including short-term goals and the list of providers. And if for a bill that's aimed at transparency and accountability, it seems to me that's going the opposite direction.
Right. No, and so again, those are sections. So again, my understanding of that section specifically was not that the short-term goals are not coming out. They have to be there in order for us to understand whether the goals ultimately are being met. It was, and I mentioned this, I think, when we spoke to a couple of people when we spoke, it was supposed to be, conforming to federal standards. So the federal standard had sort of different requirements than state standards. And at the point where we're already submitting those documents, they were not in compliance. But I don't want to say, I'm not sure where that piece is. So, because again, I raised that. Andy, you had mentioned that, and I did raise that point. So
no, I understand. Yeah. I'm raising some questions that we've talked about individually.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
It's a larger audience here.
Right. So I have raised that. So I'm not sure where that will. And again, that's why I'm not. I just want to be available and accessible and talk to people. But I want you to know that I'm not sure right now even what the exact final language of the bill will be.
Okay. Look, from our point of view, one of the biggest issues out there is the staffing shortage, the lack of funds to provide for staff, and the bill does have this offset grant, a strange name, which does put a 50% weight and uses the basic structure of the ECS formula. What are you hearing from the budgeteers, from the governor's office and from the leadership about whether any of that's going to get funded?
Well, that's why those questions will start coming now that we're having very careful appropriations discussions, those will come up. I think, so part of why that was important was to give some of the funding upfront to districts, so that they can start building that in-district capacity. Because I do think where it's possible, I think we have to start trying to build that. And I think, you had mentioned, Annie, you sent a letter saying where are the points of agreement, and I think that's certainly one of them. Where, and again, where the districts are able to provide that capacity, it is better in general for students to be able to stay in their district, but they don't have the ability right now to be able to build that in-district capacity. And so that's why even in the governor's budget, there was a grant program for building that in-district capacity. And again, that's not going to mean they're going to serve all the students, because there's some students they're just not able to serve. But and again, it's not every district, but for the districts that have a number of students that they actually could serve, and the only reason they're not serving those students is because they lack capacity, shifting that funding up front provides a little more predictability, and it provides an ability for them to start building that in-district capacity. Now, all of that again is also not going to happen overnight, but we have to start allowing districts to be able to do that. So the more that we can put grants for that. Now, I agree. I think we should be doing even more for a teacher pipeline and paraprofessionals. My mom is a paraprofessional, by the way, and so living wage, making sure that paras have a living wage. I mean, that's a little bit harder for us to address. So any suggestions on that? I've asked the teachers organizations as well, would be welcome, because we can't just provide sort of one-time grant funding to just say, okay, hire another teacher, because after that funding is finished for that one cycle, the district is now obligated to continue spending that funding, and if they don't have it allocated, they're not going to be able to continue that. So we need to think about a sort of sustainable way to have, teachers in the pipeline and paraprofessionals.
Well, absolutely. And the bill does not have much on teacher prep in it. And that's
right. We're working.
Critical issue.
Yep.
And we're certainly in agreement with you on that.
Yeah.
Our parents are as frustrated as many teachers are with CT SEDS.
Yes, I've heard that. Yes.
I mean, it's obviously not within the purview of the legislature to rewrite CT SEDS, but what is within your purview? How can we fix that?
Yeah, and again, this is why I say there's so many pieces of this bill. So one of the ways initially we're thinking about it was to offer or to put in that bill some kind of administrative offset. So to help because that's impacting teacher workload. So there's also a workload analysis. Part of what the bill is doing is again, getting the kind of data that we need to then answer these questions and come up with real comprehensive solutions, is first to do an analysis of the workload analysis for teachers. How much administrative work are they doing that they didn't do 10, 15 years ago that has been worsened by, a program like CT SEDS, and how can we improve that? And so I think part of that will just be part of a study that that focuses on that and tries to understand that workload analysis. And then also if there's, we put in for an instructional, basically a specialist that is an instructional specialist. But that might come out too, because it's the point was not to burden the schools, with sort of looking for another position, but it was to think about how we can handle the administrative load of teachers so that teachers can be focusing on students in the classroom. So that may be something we just have to keep talking to the State Department about, because I've heard many things from teachers and parents about this new program, which is supposed to be for efficiency, and it seems like it's creating more of a workload burden. So I don't know what to do about that specifically. But again, that's certainly a piece we have to look into. And I think in the workload analysis, that's going to be there for sure.
Well, as you know, I was one of the tri-chairs of the special ed task force. And we discussed some of these issues like workload and other big issues like that. And we just did not have the staff backup to actually do some real work on that. And I'm concerned that this bill assigns 6 new studies to the Bergen Commission.
Mhm.
But a Bergen Commission also doesn't have any staff. Has thought been given to actually appropriating some funds to this commission so they can actually
Yes.
do the work?
Yeah, I don't know about but yes, in terms of, and also that's where I say, Andy, that's why I'm not sure where we are with the final bill, because you're right. I think there's just there are many components, and we may not be able to address all of them all at one time.
Sure.
In which case, that's why I say this is a process, and we can, we'll still have the special education committee next year, and then we can add on, right? I mean, at least continuing this for these 2 years.
So
You
the committee
stole
has a
my
2-year life.
question.
That was one of your questions? Yeah.
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 Committees are
Well,
out
at
next
least for the two, at least for through this legislative cycle. So for the next year, which will be will be there. Now, going beyond that, I don't know. I mean, to me, there's a lot that has to be done. So it does seem to make sense to have the select committee, maybe at least until some of these, oh gosh. Look, I guess I'm moving around a lot more than when I'm sitting here. Hold on.
Yeah,
Sorry.
right. I don't know.
Yeah, hold on. It's the my little office up on the 5th floor. So I think, again, I think because just like we're saying now, we're not going to be able to handle everything in the first bill. There might, right? And also, and and some of it's important that this process be inclusive, and that's why that's why I made myself available. I'm ready to talk. I think that should be true of the process going forward. It has to be inclusive and collaborative. Things have to get done, but we still need to hear from stakeholders about what those implications are, right? What unintended consequences may result. And sometimes you have to then adapt, like you have to come up with a plan and then see how that's working. And so that all takes a little bit of, I mean, it can't, this is something where we haven't had oversight, for like decades now. And so you can't just do everything in 3 months. And so that's really where we are, is, well, where can we go that's reasonable? But to me, that is always going to involve sort of the initial step in a process that's going to have to continue.
Well, that's that is a concern about this, that we just, we're operating without the information we need to make decisions in a lot of cases.
Yep.
Um,
That's the first step. Yeah, absolutely.
and one of the concerns we have is there's been so much attention to these expensive outplacements, and they are expensive. But the kids who are outplaced are the ones with the highest needs. And
Yeah.
federal law requires that each child have an appropriate education, and these private placements implement the IEPs drafted by the school districts.
Absolutely. No, and it cannot be driven by cost. And we're talking about education and the needs of students. I think it has to be that we have to have oversight over cost when it comes to public dollars. So the fact that I can't tell you, because I haven't seen the information of like what is being charged for what is, that I think is the oversight problem. And so that has to be addressed for sure. First, because we need to have a sense of how those dollars are being spent. But, I mean, we absolutely have a mandate to make sure that students' needs are met. So, and that's why we have to be careful, because we want to make sure that we're setting rates that are in fact based on what is reasonably happening right now. It's just important to know what that is, which we don't.
And one of the reasons I think that there hasn't been legislative oversight is because the Connecticut legislature has so little power over this whole special ed system, which is so heavily regulated by federal law. I mean, there's not a lot that the legislature can do to affect that. Do you agree with
Well,
that?
yeah, that may be, but I mean, I still think we should have I mean, we should already be able to answer some of these questions, because like you said, the State Department has data that we should be able to have a sense of, a more comprehensive analysis of who's being outplaced where. And again, that some of that is available, but that's the first step. And then we do have to try to understand, where have these, because costs have been rising. So the question is, where have they been rising? Why? Is it reasonable? Is it just matching the services that are needing? Is it because there's more students? Well, those are all questions that have to be answered first, before we, and then, and then I think the next part is equally as important, which is, again, if districts feel like, especially the districts that can build an in-district capacity to serve some of their students, those students would be better served by being able to stay in their district. And they're already spending unnecessary costs then on transportation when they don't have to. That we can do something about. And that will in terms of financial savings, where it makes sense to allow districts to save money, we ought to be doing that. But again, is where the districts are not able to handle the needs of students, those students still have to be outplaced, but we should already be able to say, well, how many of students are being outplaced because the district doesn't have capacity versus how many students are being outplaced just because because the district can't meet their needs. And I think those are all the first questions. And then we're also creating those structural changes where, we also want to help parents. So that's what we put in a provision about the educational ombudsman. I know the process is difficult enough. So can we have someone there? When I talked to the State Department, they said they already have a call center process that's like an ombudsman process. I'm curious to know how many parents utilize that. I'd love to hear more about that. But we definitely, we heard from parents that this process is difficult enough too for them. So some support on that side, support for teachers, and then support for districts so that they can build. So I thought those are proactive steps. So it's not just that, we're collecting the data. I do think the first step is to make sure we have some, comprehensive analysis. But then I think it's important to start taking the steps to reduce costs where we can. Again, the goal isn't like, let's make this as cheap as we can. The goal is always the primary goals. And again, as an educator, and I'd say most of the members of the committee are educators, but as an educator, the primary goal is how do we meet students' needs? Oh my gosh, sorry, I'm about to miss a vote. Give me a second.
A new innovation since COVID that you're allowed to vote from your
I'm allowed
computer.
to vote remotely. That's why I can get on this meeting. Hold on, and I'm about to get a call because I'm the only person that didn't. Okay, there we go.
All set? Okay. Well, let me ask first on those questions. I mean, we've got 7,500 kids outplaced now of the 94,000 special ed kids in Connecticut. 7,500 outplaced, slightly over half at the RESCs, slightly under half at the approved private special education placements. Where are we going to get this information about how many could be in district if there was capacity, how many need to be outplaced, and if they're in district, whether they need to be in a self-contained program or in a program which has typical kids nearby?
That would be the State Department.
The State Department has that information, you think?
I mean, they've said that they have most of the information. That's what I mean, but we still have to engage in it in a way where we can have an analysis that provides that information. They have the data that they've collected, like from the IEPs, but there has to be engagement with that data, and that's the first step.
And that's what I said to you before, which is that CT-SEDS, for all its problems, is a centralized computer system
exactly,
where a lot of information could be gleaned, but we have not seen any general reports generated from CT-SEDS.
Right. And I don't know enough about, I don't know the system as well to know where it's going to come from, and the State Department has said to me, they do have the data, and they have analyzed some of it, but there's other data that we have to engage with the data in a way, right? Because anybody who's in data analytics knows that like having the data doesn't mean anything unless you sort of understand how to study that data and you engage in the data with that data in a way that, helps move the process forward. So yeah, absolutely. So that's part of what we're tackling. This is a monumental task here.
Now, I know you're a big proponent of an ombuds person. Describe to me what it would look like. In your dream world.
Yeah, in my dream world, it would be we would invest in having somebody who's there as an intermediary for parents in particular, because, you know, these systems are really complicated to navigate, and to make sure that when parents feel like, well, I have a sense of like what my students need, am I being heard, that there's somebody that they can talk to. Now, the State Department has said that they have a call center that they just recently created that does some of this work. So it would be nice to know that parents are able to access, you know, somebody who's acting, who's there as a you know, an intermediary. And then also, I would say for what we heard in the public hearings was teachers and staff members who feel, you know, they want to say something at a PPT meeting, but they don't feel comfortable saying it because they don't know how the district will react. You know, again, a person who can be there to help, you know, mediate for them. So that would be the role. And, you know, and the ombudsman piece is, of course, the question is a resource piece. And again, the State Department, to my understanding, may have a similar kind of program. It's just to make sure that there's something in place so that parents know that there's somebody that they can talk to when they're kind of struggling through a very complex system.
So
There's also the complaint process, the written complaint process in the State Department of Education, which is now completely bogged down. And you know, and it's much more formalized. I mean, than what you're describing, where a parent just needs advice on how to move forward. You know, but you know, it can be a powerful unit.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And I think the call center comes out of that unit. So I mean, beyond a formal complaint process, it's a place where people can have, you know, can sort of in real time reach out for assistance in navigating a very complex system and be able to have that assistance, and have some oversight over that process. And again, so again, that's also being discussed because there are some resources that may already be in place that, you know, maybe we just enhance those resources. But that ombudsman piece was, you know, I think it's an investment that's important for parents. So
What can
let me,
go ahead, John.
I'm sorry. Let me interject a question that we got from one of our parents, actually prior to that, and with regards to the ombudsman. And the concern was, what have you done to define how that person would be identified and hired? Would there be input from families? Would there be parents involved in the hiring committee, whatever, or has that been defined yet?
No, that hasn't been defined, and that's why I'm saying I'm not sure. So the ombudsman would be probably hired, appointed in the same way as sort of other heads, directors of programs or commissioners, but it wouldn't just be one person. I mean, we would be talking about an ombudsman and an entire staff. So there would be a significant cost for that. And so again, I don't want to. Yeah, we're looking for a way for parents to have, you know, some ability to, when they're navigating through a complex system, be able to have somebody that they can talk to that can help them, especially if they feel, you know, they're not being heard by the school district. And given the State Department, or may already have, hold on a minute, somebody's at the door, may already have some resources there, that might be the way we're going. So just give me 1 minute, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I think, John, if that was, you know, you can, there's a whole bunch of questions, obviously, in the chat, and we ought to start asking those.
Yes. I have been focusing on listening, but let me go.
Okay.
I've been answering some questions.
Great. Yeah, and I'm sorry, I might have to jump off soon.
Okay, we have a bunch of questions.
Oh, go ahead. Yes.
In chat. So,
Yes, yes.
Stacy, you're going to do it? Or?
Oh, the chat? Yes. I've been answering the Q&As, but the chat, where would you like? There's a bunch of comments and questions.
Well,
one was about that one of the silver linings of this bill had some proactive behavior.
Yes.
And the parent was concerned that was still going to be in the bill.
Yes. So, I mean, yeah, oh, yes. I mean, again, a lot of, so what will sort of be the priority coming out of this immediate version? I don't know. That's why I don't want to say we're still working on that, but certainly, yes, the assessments for interventions, including tier 2 interventions, behavioral health, thinking about specifically how to address, students who have not been identified properly for dyslexia, for example. Those things are all in there as part, and initially as trying to do a study or an assessment of what that would look like. So some version of that will be in the bill.
So tell me why the focus is on tier 2 only. I mean, it's a 3-tier system, with tier 1 being, some level of specialist working with a large group, tier 2
Yeah.
being a specialist working with a small group, and tier 3 being one-on-one support. As a
No, it's adding on tier 1 and tier 2. Or tier 2 and tier 2 and tier 3.
The bill, as it was reported out, only dealt with tier 2, and I just never understood why particularly tier 2. I mean, I think, our view is that the entire system of response to intervention and multi-tiered systems of support really needs to be augmented and mandated throughout the state. And the reason that we've had failure in that area is because the specialists who are supposed to serve tier 2 and tier 3 are the first ones fired when when there's staff shortages.
Well, that's why I think it was also to allow tier 2 and tier 3 services to be used as part of the special education. So it was providing like funding that was also accounting for tier 2 interventions and tier 3 interventions, I thought, but
Okay.
yeah.
As long as we're on the same page on that one. I mean,
Yeah. No, it was to expand, to incorporate more, because again, that may be a way for students who particularly would be served by those services and by those interventions, to account for that in terms of when we're looking at special education altogether.
So there's
in
some
other words,
comments.
Stacy, I have plenty of other questions in my mind. Tell me,
I think there's more, Andy. There's a bunch of questions I
Yeah.
see in the
Okay,
chat.
you got them?
Yeah, so Andy, what I was going to say was, there are a bunch of comments that seem to be coming into the chat. I'm just going to, restate them as, questions concerning the jurisdiction and effectiveness of the ombudsman versus making it more accessible for parents to be able to have some form of representation at PPT meetings. I believe that the concern here in the chat is that it's one thing for a parent to be able to call up an ombudsman and be told, well, these are your rights. But when they get to the PPT, that doesn't necessarily carry much weight, especially if the ombudsman's not present at that PPT. And so one way that we could better level that playing field if the ombudsman doesn't have, significant jurisdictional powers or enforcement powers could be to, set aside money to empower families to have representation at public expense.
Okay.
And I'm restating what's in the chat.
Yeah. And again, that's why I'm saying these. I mean, I'm happy to take input from parents too. I mean, that's why I think the process should involve stakeholders. So I will make note of that.
Talk to me a bit about equity. I mean, we have a system which works or can work relatively well for people with means, but does not work particularly well at all for people without money. What can we do about that?
Well, that's a big question. What area are you talking about? And how many hours do we have? Tell me specifically what do you mean? Because there's a lot of ways we need to address equity problems throughout the state.
Well, I mean, special education gives parents certain rights to enforce their right to a free, appropriate public education for their child. Often, to exercise those rights means hiring somebody like one of us, which is only available to parents with means. And parents without means, there's legal aid, but that's very limited in what they have for staff. There is the special education legal fund, which provides some money for parents who qualify to hire an attorney. But still, for the kids in Bridgeport, they do not have. I mean, Bridgeport has a substantially, as you know way better than I do, a substantially underfunded special education system with a huge number of vacancies, both of special educators and paraeducators. And yet, you go 2 towns away to Westport, and it's exactly the opposite situation.
No, exactly. I mean, that has to be, I mean, that's part of why we propose the ombudsman piece in there, is because is there an intervention? And we're also talking to the State Department about the interventions that they that they have, like this call center, which is supposed to be a resource for parents who are having difficulty with the districts. And so the State Department would be able to sort of step in and to have somebody there who could step in as a resource to parents. So those are some ways, I think, to address the process itself, helping parents just navigate that a little bit more. And I would like to see even more of that, in the bill. And that's why we particularly, focused on that kind of ombudsman piece. And just, one thing to keep in mind is, we are in a budget crisis right now as well, because we have federal cuts that are coming down, that are looming. We have no idea what the impact on that is going to be when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to education, when it comes to housing, when it comes to food insecurity. And so that's why I say, if you want to talk equity issues, there are so many things we need to think about. And so we are doing this sort of we have to think about, about that in terms of so with an ombudsman, I'd love to see an ombudsman with an entire staff that can go to, any corner of the school. Now, is that going to be something that we would prioritize over, more robust in-district programming, which can help bring students, students who are able to be back in the district? I don't know, because those will be trade-offs in terms of cost. So we have to look at the overall cost of, and that's why I mean, when you have a 63-page bill, you're going to have to look at overall costs and figure out where are we prioritizing when we're in the middle of this budget crisis. And also we've the federal ARPA funds that used to be available are no longer available. So it's not only, programs that now require that funding, and programs that were receiving federal funding, like, for education, like for Bridgeport Title I funding, that's no longer there. So how do we, now we're going to have to figure out at the state level how to fill in those gaps. Plus we need to make sure, right, that we're doing what we can to reform and restructure special education. So again, it's all a kind of balancing of all of those needs. So I think, and again, that's why I say, I think what will happen in the bill is we will, it won't be the 63-page bill that you see come out of committee. It will be pieces that we can take forward that will help move us along. And that's why I say a process, because it can't be that we tackle everything right in the beginning. It's got to be a continued process of doing it. And again, making sure that probably meets, I think, some of the concerns that people had. Is we certainly don't want to rush through the process. And what I heard from parents most is a real alarm that, like, and that's why there is not that rush implementation date. Let's not rush through a process, because it is going to take time to figure out how to do this right.
Okay, one last question I have.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of concern expressed about unilateral parental placements, where a parent is able to demonstrate the program offered by the district fails to provide a FAPE to their kids, and then they have the right to place them privately and sue for reimbursement. Now, the vast majority of those cases result in some sort of cost-sharing settlement agreement between the parent and the district. Some do go to hearings, and sometimes parents win and get full reimbursement. What's the concern there, and what's the bill likely to do in that area?
I think that was wrapped into the due process question of shifting the burden of proof. But like I said, and you saw in the committee, there was disagreement around that. There's not consensus around that issue. And so if anything, it would be a sort of a study on what that looks like. What are what consequences, come from shifting that burden? Because, it's important too that the school district that has the information, there's a reason that burden is on the school district. And so we're not just shifting that burden without, some understanding of, like, what does that look like? What does it mean? What are the consequences? So I think those are all tied together. And as you saw, there were, objections to that. And in fact, there was an amendment that was put on that it failed in the committee. But, again, that is certainly a point where I think, what will likely wind up is at most maybe a study around it.
But I want to back up to 30,000 feet on this one and ask, what's the perception of unilateral parental placements that led to that sort of legislation?
You're asking the person who's been here for I don't know. And I said the same thing for this other bill. Somebody, you know, I'm taking out a bill that has like a 30-year history, and I said I can tell you from this moment on what the consequences of the bill will be like, but I don't know the intentions of, you know, because we worked on this collaboratively to put it together. So I don't know that there was except that you know, districts had said that there were some issues with understanding all of the claims that were being brought in placement. So beyond that, I would say, and I'd say, you know, I'm not sure that that's really going anywhere besides at least having a study on it so that I can understand it properly. I can tell you coming into this, I don't fully understand all of the aspects of, you know, and being a litigator, all of the aspects of, you know, the special education due process issues. And so at most it will be that.
Okay, I just, you know,
Yeah.
look, we have our perception from our work in the field on this. And obviously there's different perceptions of what's going on, which led to the drafting of this bill. And we're, you know, it is really important for us to understand what's driving a lot of these sections, because if there's a problem, we want to know what the problem is and work together
Well,
to
I mean,
find
but
a
like you said, I
solution.
mean, so I can tell you my perspective. You know, I think part of the problem is we don't have the data. So before we jump, we really shouldn't be jumping to conclusions about anything, I would say, because until we know exactly why students are being placed, again, what services are required, what is the capacity of districts to be able even be able to provide this, you know, and then to understand what's reasonable from there. So, you know, again, it's a process that I think we have in place, and I think it's a good thing that we started having a discussion about this process. And I saw somewhere in the chat somebody talked about the silver lining, right? Because the silver lining of having these discussions, even when it's a task that, you know, that is maybe not something you take on all at one time and certainly don't rush through, it's something that probably should have already been done. And so the fact that we're doing it now is important.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So how late are you going to be there tonight?
Oh, late. Oh boy, another vote. Sorry.
I
I better jump off. I'm sorry. I'm like, I want to be available, but like it's a little crazy in the middle of session.
understand that. Really appreciate you doing this.
We very much appreciate.
Yeah.
And our last question is always, what gives you hope?
Oh, you know, so I'm, as a teacher of democracy, you know, I mean, people may look at the public hearing, it felt like it was a little contentious at the beginning. That's why I want to make sure I'm accessible, because I believe in a process that's inclusive, that where you're listening to different stakeholders. And I think that disagreement is fine. We have to figure out what's best for students, particularly here. That's our goal in education, is like what's best for the students. We also have to make sure, as a secondary issue, right, if the costs are unsustainable, you know, why? And what can we do about that? And like, let's look at all of these pieces of the process by including everyone in the conversation. And so I look at public hearings when we have the kind of outpouring of parents and teachers and advocates that come. I call that a success of democracy, you know. So I think that's incredible. And so and that's why I make myself available, because it's important to be available and to listen, whether it's thank you, did a good job, or what are you doing? Like, well, what are you doing with this bill? You know, you need to hear me on this. I think that's important. I think that's all important. And so I will certainly continue to be available and accessible. That's why I wanted to make sure I jumped on, as long as I wasn't presenting a bill. But I'm also happy to, you know, parents have questions, they can come directly to me as well. And as things come out and as the bill gets finalized, I'm happy to come back. What?
Say, don't invite people to contact you, because you're
Okay.
deluged.
Okay.
No, and I got to say, on behalf of SEEK, you know, we really appreciate you. You are
Thank you.
just such a bright light on the committee, somebody to talk to, somebody who seems to listen and understand issues.
I try. Well, thank you.
It is a real pleasure, and you know, I'm sorry I never got the chance to study constitutional law with you.
Well, I'm having those conversations too. Yeah, nothing I love more than talking about the Constitution. I can tell you that.
Well, we can, when session's over, let's have that conversation.
Yes, yes. And again,
That's-
once the bill is finalized and everything, again, I'm happy to, to have these sort of smaller individual meetings, but then also to come back to talk about it and then to talk about the process going forward. So I'm available and accessible. Just you let me know and I'm happy to join when I can.
We very, very much appreciate that, Senator, and we will absolutely and positively take you up on that. Let me ask you one final,
Sure.
hopefully very short answered question. Uh, we might get a couple more in, but do we have any sense of when this revised bill will show up for us to look at?
Yes. That's a good, and again, it's hard for me because I feel like maybe I speak out of turn being the newest person in the Senate. A lot of this process is unfamiliar to me, so I'm learning as we go. I'm hopeful. I mean, by some point early next week. Now I don't know what that means in terms of like where the formal language comes out, but we should have we're definitely talking about what we want to prioritize and how that should come out. So maybe even tomorrow, but tomorrow, and what's coming out of education, by the way, I think is just going to be the bill that came through special education. So I just want people to understand, you probably won't see anything different in coming out of education than you did out of this special education committee, because again, the structure that we created this time was different than just a bill coming straight from education and going to the floor. So because we have dual cognizance, because both special education and education have cognizance over this, it has to be referred to education. And so my understanding is that education will the bill will just come out of education, and then we have to decide how to shift those the concepts into a Senate and House bill. So that's what's going to be coming up next, and from that we'll be paring down, I'm pretty sure, because you won't see all of those concepts in there.
Well, it's also an appropriations tomorrow, and I assume this has one whopper of a fiscal note. Is there?
I know, exactly.
Is there a fiscal note out there yet?
I thought there was already. It already went through appropriation.
For those of you in the audience who don't do this stuff all the time,
yeah,
a fiscal note is when the Appropriations Committee determines how much this particular effort is going to cost and what the implications are on that.
Yeah.
It's up in appropriations tomorrow at 10, and then in education at 11.
Which will just be that's just the original Senate bill. Yeah, then that's the original bill.
Right.
And that does not leave you a huge amount of time to fix things.
No. I mean, it didn't go through we have a fiscal, we only have a fiscal analysis. We have a fiscal analysis on it, but didn't go through, which is available.
It is. Okay. I hadn't looked at that. Okay.
Yeah, so there's a fiscal note on it. It's just, it didn't go through, it's going through appropriations. That's available on the website if you go.
Okay, I'll take a look at that. Yes.
Find it. Yeah.
Yep, and you're quite right. There are a lot of competing priorities.
Yeah. Oh, and I see Allison said huge fiscal note. Yes, you're right.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's
yeah, because I'm like, I saw a fiscal note on there. So it's big. Yeah. Well, because it's a big bill, so that's why I say there are pieces of it going forward. And by the way, thank you to Allison is one of the people who provided very helpful suggestions. I mean, there are a lot of people that have really good ideas and suggestions, and so that's why to me this process has to be as inclusive as possible, because those comments and those ideas are important to help move legislation forward. And that's why I'm like, don't think about it as like this is it and whatever comes out is it. It's got to be a process. That's why I keep using the word process. Like, we've got to think about what do we do now, given the time constraints and all the other constraints I mentioned, and then we're certainly going to have to figure out how do we add on from there and add on and strengthen, improve. Yeah.
Senator, we want to thank you so much for coming on and multitasking.
Yes.
He said as she starts to multitask.
As I'm like going on for them. I'm sorry. I apologize for going back and forth. It's in the middle of session, but I'm very glad to be able to be here and just again to be available.
We will absolutely have you back to talk on this further when we've seen what's comes out of this, and look forward to that, and look forward to seeing you in Hartford over the next few days.
Yes.
Yeah. See you tomorrow.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you all. I'm going to figure out how to turn this thing off. For those parents who are on here, this will be recorded and will be posted on SEEK's website. You will be able to get access to it. And we will be forwarding all of your comments and questions to the senator so that she will have hard copies of that. We appreciate you all being on tonight and have a pleasant evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Fine.
Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to turn the bloody thing off.
Recording.
Hit the record button again.
Should be a stop record up there next to
Yep.
record.
Oh, and we lost John. So we should all just leave.
No, well, I want to get him back on.
Naomi, can you stop?
It's still recording. Let's do it by, let's get off and do it by phone. Do it by phone.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Here, I'll stop recording.